people. And he wanted to seek tawbah. Every time he killed somebody, he felt bad. So he went and he sought a pious person, and he asked this pious person, and he said, I killed 99 people. Is there any forgiveness for me? Is there any hope for me? And the man told him, there is no hope for you, there is no forgiveness for you. So the man killed him. So now he killed 100 people, and then he felt bad. So he went and he asked another pious person, and then he asked the pious person, he said, I killed 100 people, is there any tawbah for me? Barakallahu fik, is there any hope for me? And he said, yes, of course there's hope for you, but you need to move from your town, you need to move from where you are, and you need to go to another place. And then the man set out on this journey, and then he died. He didn't get to his destination. And then the angel of mercy and the angel of the hellfire, they're fighting over his soul. So they took their dispute to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah ta'ala said, measure the distance. If he's closer to the city he was going to, then take him to the paradise. If he's closer to the city that he left, put him in the hellfire. They measured the distance, they found him closer to his destination, so he went into paradise. So I hope you all know this story, but there's an important detail of the story that I didn't say, that's obviously in the text of the hadith, which is obviously why I said it that way, to get to my point. The first person that the man went to was an abid, was a worshipper, was an ascetic, was somebody who had dedicated their life to worship. The second person that the man went to was an alim, he was a scholar. This hadith is usually used by us to talk about Allah Ta'ala's mercy. Okay, this hadith is used by us to talk about Allah Ta'ala's mercy, which is obviously, goes without saying, that's the essential part of the hadith. Allah Ta'ala's mercy is beyond what we can imagine, alhamdulillah. But that's not what I wanted to focus on. I wanted to focus on those two people, because that's a detail that's very informative for our condition and something that we forget about. The first person that the man went to was an abid. What is an abid? An abid is somebody who dedicates the majority of their life to worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What we would call a pious person, a saintly person. They're always in the masjid, they're always reading the Quran, they're always fasting the sunnah fasts, they're always praying qiyamul layl. They're doing a lot in the spiritual devotional works. So this man, if you saw this man, or it could easily be a woman, but if you saw this man, you would say, wow, I wish I could be like this person. This is a person that's going to the paradise. This is a person that's got it all figured out. But that man was unable to save this man's soul. The second person that the man went, and he killed him. The second person that the man went to was a scholar. A scholar is a person that spends most of their time studying, understanding the text, explaining to people how to interpret the text in their current condition. They might not outwardly look as pious as that man. They might not worship as much as that man. But the scholar knows, in this story, he knew that there was a deeper problem. He said, how on earth can you live in a society that allows you to get away with killing 100 people? So clearly, it's not that you have just done something haram, but if you seek tawbah, we know that Allah's tawbah is infinite, but there is no way you will find redemption in this town, in this environment, with these people. You have to leave. You have to go to another people, another place in which the society will help you, and which the society will give you the infrastructure that you need to be an upright person. So he was able to save him. I begin with this hadith because I want to introduce this concept to you, that in Islam we have three broad Islamic, quote-unquote, Islamic personalities. And one of the confusions that we find ourselves in as a Muslim community is we do not, first of all, understand that there are different Islamic personalities, and therefore we seek the wrong advice or wrong direction from the wrong personality. Now this is obviously, I'm just making a stereotype, and we're talking theoretically. Of course, people are more complicated than I'm going to actually present, but hopefully this will be like a teaching moment. So like the hadith, we have the alim, and we have the abid, and we have a third type of person called a da'i. So I want to go through these three personalities and talk a little bit about the differences and why this is an important, lesson that hopefully we can remember. So the alim in our community, the ulama in our community, are the people that spend the most of their time learning the Islamic disciplines, learning the Islamic sciences. And of course, alhamdulillah, mashallah, we have many Islamic disciplines. So there will be ulama in different disciplines. So not only do you need to remember and keep in mind that there are ulama, there are scholars and experts, but not every expert is an expert in every discipline. So you might find somebody, for example, who is an expert in the Arabic language, in the grammar, in the nahu, in the sarf, in the balagha, ilm al-urud, poetry, adab, literature, so on and so forth. And you're not going to go ask that person for a fatwa on your 401k and your will and estate planning. It's the wrong person to ask. Some of you laughed, right? But that's exactly what we've been doing, by the way. That's exactly how we got into the mess that we're in. We asked the wrong people the wrong question. And then those people unfortunately give us the wrong answer. And then we follow it, and then we have a mess. And then we complain what's wrong with us. So in the alim, I want you to keep in mind that there are two things that are happening. Number one is you need to identify that there are experts in certain fields. And that when you need an expert opinion, or you need expert advice, or we say in modern American English, professional advice, you need to go to those people in which that is their expertise. It's not rocket science, it's very simple. And you need to recognize that not everyone is going to be an expert in all of the disciplines. So you have to also find out who is the person that you need to talk to for this. Just because someone is quote unquote a shaykh, or someone is an alim or something like that, doesn't mean that they can offer you all services and answer all questions. Then we have the da'i. The da'i is the person who spends most of their time with the community, preaching, doing the public work, doing the community work, trying to bring the people back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, helping the people come back to the masjid, helping the people practice their Islam. They have some knowledge of Islam, but they are not the expert. The problem that we have is that many times we think the da'i is the scholar, because the da'i is the personality that we see the most. They're the people that are making the content, they're debating, they have the verified accounts, they have millions of followers, millions of likes, they have a huge following, they're like a celebrity status. So psychologically that tells me, oh, I like what this person has to say, so I'm going to go ask this person about my 401k estate planning. But notice that the da'i is almost the direct opposite of the alim. The alim is the person that spends the majority of their time in the disciplines, some of their times with the community. The da'i spends the majority of the time with their community, some of their times in the disciplines. Of course, you might find both aspects in one person. We agreed in the beginning, or I hope you agree that I said, we're just talking theoretically, like stereotypical, these just broad categories, because I'm trying to make a point. The alim most likely is unknown. Most likely is not a popular person. Most likely is not a very social person. We have this concept in English, the ivory tower scholar. Why do we say that? Because the scholarly person is stuck in the library, and they don't brush their hair, and they're living with their books, and they refer to their books as their friends, and they even know the smell of their books. You can't relate on a social level to someone like that. They're living somewhere else. But boy, when you need to ask them a question about their field, they are the world-renowned expert of that field. They are the person that knows this field like none other. The da'i is the fresh, well-cut, well-trimmed, popular person. They sweet talk, they know how the right things, they know social trends, they make references to popular culture because they understand how to connect with the people. So you connect with them, and that's why they have a large following. Now the da'i is very important. I'm not trying to say that one is more important than another. As a matter of fact, we need all three of these people. We'll get to the abid momentarily. We need all of these people. But I want you to keep in mind that these are different people that provide different functions. Oftentimes the da'i, the danger in the da'i is the da'i thinks that they might know than they actually know. So because they are popular and because they're in the community and because people ask them questions, they feel an obligation to continually answer the questions. And that's where things can get wrong. So the da'i also needs to know their limit. And the da'i needs to say, you know what, you need to go to the expert, this expert that can answer your question. Let me give you this shaykh's number. They are the expert on the Islamic finance stuff, on the estate planning stuff. They'll be able to solve your problem. Okay? And then we have the abid. The abid is what we in our tradition refer to as the wali, the saintly person. The person that is always engaged in the act of worship. Keep in mind that it is the abid, the saintly person, that misguided the man in the hadith. So you might be shocked, well, how can the wali misguide the person? Because the wali, without proper knowledge, again, I'm speaking stereotypically if we just have these independent silos. Of course, it's not that simple, you know, we'll get to that shortly. But let's just assume that there's an abid type of person. The abid has an experience in their worship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But they don't necessarily have knowledge to explain to you how they got to where they're going. Or they might not have the knowledge to answer your questions that might deal with what the ulama deal with. But from the point of view of their individual worship and their experience, what we benefit from them is their state. We see them and we say, MashaAllah. We see them and we say, Subhanallah, how you can transform your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They look so content, they look so happy, they look like they have light in their face. They're always consistent in their ibadah. I want to be like that. I want to be consistent in my ibadah like that. But that does not necessarily mean that their religious experience equals religious knowledge. It doesn't mean that their experience of the deen equals knowledge of the deen. And that's one of the major problems that got us into this mess that we're in. And the Prophet ﷺ said, you know, one day you're going to take your ignorant people as your imams. And you're going to ask them fatwas, you're going to ask them for questions, they're going to misguide you and you will be misguided. So we usually say, like, you know, the man with the biggest beard and the shortest thobe, you know, it's stereotypically, you know, it's not the man that knows what they're talking about. Ilm is not how the person looks. Ilm is what's in here and how they understand and their credentials and if they've written something or how they teach. That's what ilm is. We hope that the alim is pious. We hope that the da'i is pious. We hope that the abid has knowledge. But realistically, you're not going to find all three in one person. It's very rare to find that. People will usually be a little bit more one than the other. So one of the most important things about this hadith, other than, of course, the rahmah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, one of the most important things about this hadith is notice who misguided this man and who saved this man. The alim is the one that saved this man because he understood the details of the situation. And he was able to give him that guidance, that package, and guide him. He didn't even tell him this environment is bad. He just told him, you know, that's our tafsir of the hadith. We're trying to understand the wisdom of what he said. He just said, no, go to that other town and inshallah you'll find your salvation there. So in our community, we have these three broad type of personalities. We have the scholar, we have the preacher, the da'i, and we have the saintly person. One of the things that we do, that we make a mistake, is that we do not make a distinction between deen and tadayyun. Deen is the study of the religion. Tadayyun is the practice of the religion. We all have to practice Islam. We all have to pray 5 times a day. We have to fast Ramadan. We have to pay our zakah. It's haram to lie. It's haram to steal. All of those things equally apply to all of us. But if I pray more than you and fast more than you, that does not mean I know more than you. As a matter of fact, when the Prophet ﷺ came to describe the Khawarij, he said exactly that. تَحْقَرُونَ صَلَاتَكُمْ إِلَى صَلَاتِهِمْ وَصِيَامُكُمْ إِلَى صِيَامِهِمْ. They pray more than you and they fast more than you, but they pass through this dunya like an arrow passes through the bow. They read the Quran more than you, but the Quran doesn't go past their throats, it doesn't penetrate their hearts. So in this example, the Prophet ﷺ told us something even more explicit. He said that one of the signs of those that leave the community and are extreme is that they have extreme amounts of worship. And all of the Khawarij, almost all of the Khawarij, from the beginning of the message of the Prophet ﷺ to our time, they were all zuhad. What does that mean in our language? They had street cred. They look like they're more Muslim than we are. They look like they're more pious than we are. They live simply and I just want to live in a cave and all I need is the Quran with me, and they have all of these things, and then they're the people blowing up masajid. So when you see them not knowing what they're doing, you say, subhanAllah, this guy is in the mosque all the time. He reads the Quran all the time. Al-Baghdadi, for example, his PhD dissertation in Baghdad University was in qira'at, in the Quran. I mean, he's a proof against himself, exactly what the Prophet ﷺ said. Look what he did. Look how many innocent Muslim souls' lives, how much blood is on that man's hands. May Allah Ta'ala forgive him. So, when you practice Islam, that doesn't mean you know more about Islam. It means you practice more. And you have that warm, fuzzy feeling inside. Alhamdulillah, this is the light of faith. This is a gift that Allah has given you. But do not think that that means that you know more. Many people make that confusion. So they see the person in their community that's practicing more Islam than them. So then they start asking that person. So then that person starts to think, well, obviously they're asking me because I'm pious. Right? And that's the first mistake. That's actually the mistake that Iblis made. We don't believe in first sin, we don't believe in original sin, of course, but we have a concept of first. What was the first sin ever? Naam? The apple? No, before that. There's a sin before that. What's the first sin? Racism? No. Okay, why arrogance? Because Iblis didn't bow down to Adam. Iblis said, Ana khayrun minhu. خَلَقْتَنِي مِن نَارٍ وَخَلَقْتَهُ مِن طِينٍ. Allah says, bow down to Adam, and then what did the first word? He said, me. Who are you in the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? You are nothing. But because Iblis was a jinn that worshipped Allah for, I don't know, 3, 4, 5,000 years, more than all of our lives combined, he's like, I'm Mr. Tadayyun, but I've been worshipping God loyally for 3,000 years. Now you want me to bow down, to prostrate myself, to abase myself to this thing that you just created, and you created him out of earth and you created me out of fire? That's the sin of Iblis. It's arrogance, but he made the confusion of deen and tadayyun. He thought that his practice, his worship, the quantity of his relationship with Allah Ta'ala equated to him being better or him being knowledgeable, so on and so forth. If your Islam, if your practice of Islam makes you arrogant, you've gone the wrong way. You've misunderstood the map. Your practice of Islam should make you soft, should make you humble, should make you man tawada'a lillahi rafa'ahu, the person who abases and lowers themselves to Allah, Allah Ta'ala will raise them, not that I raise myself. So in the issue of these three personalities, I also want you to keep in mind that there is this difference between the practice of Islam and the knowledge of Islam. Now this does not mean that the ulama should not be pious. I mean, if you're an alim of Islam and you're not pious, you've also gone the wrong direction. I mean, hopefully, inshallah, the ulama are supposed to be pious. But in my experience, the ulama, their form of worship is their study. So they might not pray a lot like the pious person. You know, they might not outwardly look like they're praying and they're devoting a lot of ibadat to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But that's because their knowledge is their form of worship. And sometimes we don't see that. So we just assume, oh, look at this, look at this guy. I remember when I first went to Al-Azhar, this was a big problem for me. Many of the Azhari mashayikh, they wear suits and they're clean shaven in the mosque. And I'm like, what's going on? This is ridiculous. I mean, it looks so funny to me. It still looks funny to me, but I've learned to appreciate it. And then they're like, you don't know this is, Professor so-and-so. This is, he's a big scholar. So one of them, I don't want to mention his name because I don't want to say anything bad. He is the son of one of the Shaykh al-Azhar, one of the Mashayikh of al-Azhar. And that Shaykh al-Azhar I have a great affinity to. And at the time I was reading his works, I was like, that's his son. Really? Yeah. So I went to his office, afterward. I found his office in the university, and I went and I sat with him. And this guy was Mubarak. This guy was a wealth of, I was so embarrassed that I said, astaghfirullah, that I had this feeling. This guy knew philosophy, he knew French, I was looking at a French thinker named René Guénon, who was a French thinker who converted to Islam. His Muslim name is Abdul-Wahid Yahya. We were talking about him. He knew his writings in French. I only know René Guénon's writings from English because I don't read French. He knew it in French. And I was asking him, but people say this. He's like, no, René Guénon doesn't say it. He's quoting him in French. I was like, astaghfirullah al-azim. This man is a scholar. This guy knows what he's talking about. But outwardly, he didn't look like he came from central casting. He looked like just some, Egyptian ammo, like in my family. So I made that mistake. But alhamdulillah, I caught myself, or I was embarrassed, in that early, to learn this lesson, that you can't judge a book by its cover. So these three personalities, I hope that it's clear what I'm trying to say. I tried to begin with the hadith so you understand where the context comes from, because this is a lesson, no one's going to tell you this. Very few people will tell you what I'm telling you. And I thought that this is much more important than me giving you the tafsir of Surah Ad-Duha, which you can read or something like that. Because a lot of times people are like, when I go to communities, and I don't travel as much to Muslim communities in America, but like you, I know what's going on. And people are like, why are we in this mess? Why are our communities the way they are? Because we don't put the right people in the right positions. And we don't ask the right people the right questions. As a matter of fact, in the literature of fatwa, one of the things that you're taught is you're taught how to how to ask the right question, al-istifta. So it's not just that the mufti, there's conditions for a mufti. There are conditions for the person asking the mufti. So many times people, they just simply ask the wrong question. So when I was just teaching a lot of these students, a lot of them would ask me questions, and I would correct them. Don't ask that question in this way. That's not how you ask the question. Now you guys know why I was doing that. You're smiling, huh? Now you know why I was nitpicking about how you guys were asking questions. Because the quality of your question is going to give you the quality of your answer. If you learn how to ask smart questions, the right questions, to phrase it the right way, you will get a better answer. But if you are sloppy in your question, which means you're sloppy in the way you think, you're going to get a sloppy answer. But you're not going to blame yourself, you're going to blame the person that you asked, not realizing that you just asked the wrong question. So there's also, when we ask, not only do we have to seek out the right people, but we have to also think. Allah gave us this tool, let's think, how do I ask the right question? What exactly am I trying to get at? Let me articulate myself the best way possible so I get the highest quality answer. But it starts by finding what these personalities are. Now, you will find in yourself these three facets. You will find knowledge in yourself, you will find that you talk publicly about Islam, and you also find that you have your own worship of Islam. So now coming back to reality, obviously they're not three individual people, we know that we will find people that do all sorts of things, but still somebody will be most likely predominantly one versus the other. So it's also important for yourself to know what your limits are. So that when you are placed in a situation, you know when to say, I don't know, or you know to ask somebody, you refer to somebody else. And then that which you are good at, you should push yourself and excel in it, inshallah. Okay, so that's what I wanted to say. I'm going to pause here to see if anyone has any questions, mostly because I'd like to have some of this tea. And if there are no questions, I can go for a little bit longer, but not much more, inshallah. Anyone have any questions? Naam.
Shaykh, I understand Allah is Ghafur Rahim and forgiveness is unlimited. And the question is related to the forgiveness in the first speech. So, committing murder, isn't true that the only forgiveness comes from the person you murdered, and that person is gone, and there's no forgiveness.
So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is most merciful, but in the story we talked about, the man killed somebody. How does he seek forgiveness if he killed a man? There are two things. There is the sin, the moral sin against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I took an innocent soul that Allah ta'ala has protected and I have killed this person unjustly. Wal'ayadhu billah. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for tawbah, He will give me the forgiveness. But I've also wronged this person. I killed this person, I have to pay the blood money. I stole something, I have to return it. I've insulted somebody, I have to ask for their forgiveness, etc. So if your sin involves a crime against another person, you have to also, in addition to making tawbah to Allah ta'ala, you have to also fix the wrong with that person. So both at the same time. You understand? Okay. Naam.
I was wondering, like, this is kind of a question, kind of like not a question, but I was thinking, like, we sin, right? Everybody sins. But like, once somebody's like who thinks they're pious, because they're going to the masjid, they're praying at 5 times a day, they think themselves they're pious, but then they end up sinning, and that makes them humble. Like, of course, after they sin, they ask for forgiveness, right? But then that actually helps them, like the sinning actually helps them become more humble. Because then they're not arrogant thinking, oh, I'm so pious.
So Ibn Ata'illah, he says in his hikam, that perhaps Allah Ta'ala has caused you to sin.
Yeah.
And then that sin will lead to a feeling of abasement.
Yeah.
That is better than Allah Ta'ala giving you an act of piety, and that act of piety leads to arrogance.
Yeah.
So sometimes the sin is the path to redemption. Not maybe, it is a mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he said, كُلُّ ابْنِ آدَمْ خَطَّاء وَخَيْرُ الْخَطَّئِينَ التَّوَّابُونَ. All people sin, and the best of sinners are those that constantly, tawwab is to constantly make tawbah. Not to make tawbah once, that's a ta'ib. This is at-tawwab, fa'al, to constantly make tawbah. So therefore, the human condition is that we will always sin, and therefore we always turn back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Of course, so the goal of the act, whether it's a pious act or a sin, is to have that sense of abasement and humility between you and Allah Ta'ala. So yes, so sometimes the sin can lead to that. Obviously it doesn't mean we seek out the sin, we still have to make tawbah from the sin, but of course. It's very common that people are pious and they do good works, and then that leads to arrogance.
Can you give us like a rundown of like the basics to ask the right question?
The basics to ask the right question? Well, I mean, for starters, you need to do some kind of research or some kind of reading or some kind of effort before you ask. Sometimes people ask the minute something pops up in their head. And if just because something pops up in your head doesn't mean that it's been formulated or it's been articulated. So you need to first pause and be like, okay, have I heard this before, or where does this belong in the Islamic disciplines, or what's exactly going on? Do I know about the issue so that I can articulate it? That would be the first step. And then the second step is to just actually ask yourself the question, like, how do I actually phrase it? Most people don't. They're like, kind of like, well, I heard, somebody said, and all of that means you're not thinking clearly. You haven't thought about it I'm talking about 5 minutes. What I'm talking about will take you no more than 5 to 10 minutes. And when people just go on like that, that means that they really don't know, what it is. Sometimes people ask me, I don't even understand what they're saying. I say, I have no idea what you're talking about. You're speaking English, but I don't understand, like Chris Tucker, I don't understand the words that are coming out of your mouth. So sometimes you just have to, because if you come across like that, to someone who speaks in English, then that means you haven't given yourself a moment to even speak it to yourself. So sometimes just asking yourself that question, writing it down or even saying it out loud, and then, okay, maybe that's not really what I want to say, and then asking it. We talked about coffee and how some of the ulama said coffee was haram because the word qahwa in Arabic means wine. So, somebody far away from when coffee was invented we didn't misunderstand, but the question means in their mind, is wine permissible? We said, no, it's haram. So they heard, oh, coffee is haram. And then we have this big fitna, right? Because the wrong question was asked or the wrong word was used. So you can see that sometimes these pictures, the same thing. A lot of Muslims, up until, unfortunately, till today, some people will say, oh, pictures are haram. And why is it haram? Because the surah is haram in the hadith. The Prophet ﷺ was talking about the iPhone and the surah. Obviously, the surah of the hadith means something else. We call the modern picture a surah, but that's not what the word in the hadith means. So we've obviously called something modern an old term. Is that the right term for it? Probably not, because when somebody hears the word surah and all they know is Quran and Sunnah, be like, A'udhu Billah, the surah is haram. And again, we have this where pictures are haram. So on and so forth. So we in the class, we talked about a couple of these examples. So it's just a little bit of research and trying to phrase the question out loud to yourself before you ask. Naam?
Many scholars in Muslim law, inshallah, alhamdulillah. So how we can recognize as a Muslim pious from unbiased scholar, and how should Muslim react in such situations?
A scholar's piety does not impact their scholarship. Hopefully, inshallah, they're pious. But if somebody's a scholar and they know what they're talking about, that's where you take your knowledge from. But the piety, that's where you take from the abid. So, we hope that the alim is pious. Why is he an expert in the Islamic Sharia if he's not pious? I don't know. But that's not our prerequisite. That's the mistake of the deen and the tadayyun. So the scholars, the prerequisites of the scholar is that they know their subject matter. They have published, they teach, they talk, they preach about this subject matter. They are known, they answer questions in it. That's the person you could say, they're the expert, they're the professional of that field. That's what we look for. But you want everyone to be Abu Bakr as-Siddiq wa Salah ad-Din, it's not going to happen. If you assume that, you're never going to find that. It's not how it works. Now.
Do you believe the alim needs to be more connected to the common people in terms of more accessibility, or should there always be a da'i as an intermediary?
Now remember, these are just archetypes. The scholar, part of scholarship is dedicating the majority of your time to the scholarship. So it's just that's what it means to be a scholar in any field. So, if the scholar's always out with the guys hanging out and playing basketball and soccer, that's not how a scholar lives their life. They're always reading the latest research, they're attending a conference, they're writing a paper, they're writing an article for a book, they're writing a book, they're editing a book. That's what the scholar, they spend all of their waking time doing that in any field, not just in Islam, in any expert, that's what they do. That's why they are an expert. By definition, the ulama are always going to be few, because most of you probably think that's a horrible life. For the scholar, there's no bliss in this dunya more than that. And that's why it's always going to be a few. Of the 114, 120, whatever thousand Sahaba, how many do you think were the real ulama of the Sahaba? Let's say there was 120,000 Sahaba. How many of them do you think were ulama? Naam? 5 to 10? Okay, anybody else? Naam? 10, okay. Sisters? Naam? Huh? 20. There are about 16 to 20. 120,000 Sahaba. Of them, 16 to 20 were the mujtahids, the muftis of the ummah, including Sayyidah Aisha alayhi salam. That's it. Isn't that the best generation? Aren't the Sahaba like the stars? Any one of them you follow, you're guided? Any one of them you follow, yani they're ibadah. Right? But the ilm, the deep ilm, only went back to about 16 or 20. All of the madhahib of fiqh, they go back to a handful of Sahaba, that's it. Imagine that. Which means that the other Sahaba, or most of the Sahaba, were asking those 16 to 20 Sahaba those questions. And as a matter of fact, there are some hadith that are narrated Sahabi an Sahabi. Yani the younger Sahaba heard from the older Sahaba who heard from Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Even though the younger Sahabi also interacted with Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Imam As-Suyuti, he has books, that compiles these type of Sahaba. And there were some of the Tabi'een that were more knowledgeable than the younger generation of the Sahaba. Like Hasan al-Basri radiyallahu anhu, for example. So even historically, the ulama, yani the heavy hitters intellectually, were always very few people. So by nature, you can't ask them to be more connected with the community. That's just not what they're created for. They're not built for that. Yet hopefully they can be social, but I mean, it's just, what I'm trying to say is, it's the nature of the beast, is that when you're an expert in an academic field, you're going to give your whole life to it, because there's just no end to it. Imam Shaykh radiallahu anhu, he was teaching in the mosque, and somebody said, where is the proof of Islam? Where is the hujjah in Islam? He said, the Quran. He said, and then what? And then he said, the Sunnah. And then he said, and then what? And then he said, ijma'. He said, what's your proof for that? Imam Shafi'i didn't say anything. So the man said, I'll give you the weekend. If you don't have an answer, then don't come back and teach. So Imam Shafi'i went home and he read the Quran 70 times, 70 times, until he extracted the dalil for ijma'. وَمَنْ يُشَاقِقِ الرَّسُولُ وَيَتَّبَعْ غَيْرَ سَبِيلِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ نُوَلِّهِ مَا يُتَوَلَّى وَنُصْلِهِ جَهَنَّمَ وَسَاءَتْ مَصِيرًا. Yani, if he's hanging out with the guys shooting hoops, he's not going to read the Quran for 70 times. But that was Imam Shafi'i, he could do that. 70 times, he doesn't mean he's opening and he's reading like this. 70 times, it means that the Quran is a part of his heart. That he could read it 70 times in the span of 2 days, because it's like, he just keeps reviewing it like that. To get to that level, other than it's a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you have to be meshed with your science. And that's why we have Imam Shafi'i. But how many people can do that? Very few people can do that. So the ulama will always be statistically a subset of the community. Naam. Where were you today? Okay, Allah accept from you, inshallah. Okay, you never really learn something until you teach it. So all of us who are teachers, we've all had to go through exactly that same thing and just walk over that threshold and be like, no, I gotta teach. And the first time you teach, you feel like you're a fraud. And you feel like you don't know anything, and you're nervous, and what if they find out, and I'm a shar. We all go through that same thing. So, but you'll never really learn until you teach it yourself. Because when you have to re-articulate outward to somebody else what you think you know, that's going to be the test of whether you know the subject or not. The second thing is, alhamdulillah, you have a teacher or teachers. So you ask them, should I teach this subject or not subject? And then they'll guide you. And that's essentially what the ijazah system is. The shaykh says, okay, no, Suhaila, you need to go teach. Okay. It's like an order. So you don't disobey orders. You don't say, no, I don't feel like it. No, the shaykh tells you to teach, that means you have to teach. Because he taught you, or she taught you. Now it's your responsibility to teach somebody else. And then you get stuck on something, you go back. You get stuck on something, you look it up. You'll get something wrong, that's okay. You correct yourself because you're not arrogant. You know that I'm only human. And so on and so forth, until you reach that fluency and that proficiency. It's like playing an instrument. You sit down and you listen to a symphony. The symphony is warming up. I know maybe all of you think that music is haram, so forgive the example. I don't think it's haram, so anyway. And you listen to the instruments are tuning, right? And it just sounds like it's cacophony, it doesn't mean anything. And then all of a sudden the conductor comes, and then boom, all of those instruments play together and it creates this beautiful music. But it doesn't get to that until they warm up, until they are proficient in each individual instrument. So you are an instrument, and you will not play that beautiful music until you tune yourself. And in this example, the tuning is the teaching. You have to teach, because that's where you work out where you're weak on something, where you're strong on something, what needs to be restated, so on and so forth, until you get the fluency, and then you become this beautiful instrument and you're playing this beautiful music, the music of Islam. So you have to do that. So take this as a sign that, inshallah, you're going to do it. Anybody else? Now, go ahead.
So you said it yourself that all of us, when in these circumstances, those three categories that you discuss, like when you're in the process of when you want to figure out what is your particular role, what are practical steps that you would suggest in figuring out that role? Is it because I would imagine it's not something you're going to get as an epiphany overnight. Sometimes you walk into it, or sometimes you find out you're doing it and you don't even realize you're doing it. So
you have to have a reference point. There has to be somebody, a mentor or mentors, somebody that you can turn to ask those questions, somebody that knows you, you're part of the community, somebody that knows you, that's interacted with you, and you can say, I want to get involved, I want to give more back to the community, what can I do, how can I improve? You need that type of relationship. If you keep relying on yourself, then sometimes you're struggling for no reason. It's not that, it doesn't have to be that difficult. In addition, each one of us, Allah Ta'ala has placed us in something. Each one of you is doing something in life. Allah chose that you do that thing that you're doing. So the first answer to that question is, I should be doing what I'm doing, which is what Allah, unless you're doing something haram, which you have to leave that, of course. I'm assuming none of you are doing something haram. You're working, you're a student, you're married, you're looking to get married. So make a commitment right now that whatever you're doing, you're going to double down on that. Why? Because Allah chose for you to do that. Allah put that in your path. Had Allah wanted you to do something else, He would have created you in some other place, or He would have created the circumstance for you to be in some other place. But Allah has created that you be here right now doing what you're doing. So you have to adopt that, and you have to really believe that this is where Allah wants me. Right now Allah wants me to be here with you tonight. Not there and not here and not somewhere else. So there's no point of me thinking, oh, I wish I was here, I wish I was there. That's a very un-Islamic way of thinking. But rather, okay, Allah, you want me to be here? I'm going to be completely present. I'm going to immerse myself. I'm going to be here as if there's no tomorrow. That's how success starts. When you start to do that, and you accept that resistance that we have against the qadr, because a lot of times we're fighting against, we don't realize that we're fighting against Allah. Astaghfirullah, you can't fight against Allah, you can't fight against qadr. Ibn Ata'illah, he calls it ha'it al-qadr. It's the wall of death. You're running and boom, you hit a brick wall of destiny. Or as Mike Tyson said, sometimes God wrecks your plans because your plans were going to wreck you. So sometimes that happens. So when you give up that struggle, you have a tremendous amount of ease, because you're like, alhamdulillah, I'm where I need to be. So look for a mentor, mentors, or a big brother type of situation, and also acknowledge that you are where you are. So whatever you have to do right now, you're going to finish it, complete it, excel it. You're in school, I'm going to finish school. A lot of the brothers are like, yeah, I'm taking some time off. No, finish your degree. Those of you that want to get married, take it seriously. Sisters want to get married, take it seriously. Those of you who have kids, that's where Allah placed you. That's your responsibility. And say, alhamdulillah. When you accept that, then Allah will open those other doors. And if Allah wants you to help the people of Gaza, you'll help the people of Gaza from where you are. If Allah wants you to help the people of Syria, you'll help them from where you are. So don't move yourself from place to place until Allah moves you from that place. Allah moves you from that place by creating the circumstance and the events of your life to move you from that place. I was doing my PhD at Princeton, and then after 2 years I got a job offer in Bahrain. I moved to Bahrain, and then I developed this very freaky, completely weird elbow problem. And my elbow stopped moving. I could only like move it like this. And it was really bad and no one knew. I had 2 failed surgeries. It was so bad I had to go to the Mayo Clinic. Went to the Mayo Clinic, I found an expert of this problem, and you know, I don't need to get into the technical aspect, but it was a big deal. So I had to do this surgery. My job in Bahrain ended. I was in a machine that moved my elbow 24 hours a day. I could only get out of it just to like use the bathroom. I had to pray like that. I couldn't fast Ramadan. I was in this situation, and I was taking like 2-3 oxycodone a day because of the pain. I had a huge gash in my arm. It was really, you know, very, very traumatic, mashallah. And when we came back from Bahrain, my wife and I are like, okay, what do we do now? Where do we go? If I said we left Princeton, let's go back to Princeton. So my poor wife, every weekend, she'd get in the car, take the kids, drive 3 hours to Princeton, look for a place for us to live. And you know, she'd be FaceTiming, we'd be calling, and nothing. Every weekend we couldn't find a place. I'm like, no, we have to find a place. We have to find a place to live. We have to find a place to live. We were doing this for like a month. And after once, I can't keep going. It's just 6 hours with the kids in the car by myself. It's ridiculous. If I said, khalas, maybe Allah wants us to stay here. The day that I said that, we found a place, you know, where we were next to my parents' house. Literally that day, we found a place. It was very affordable. It was very spacious. And 2-3 months later, I found out that the masjid that I'm currently at now is just opened down the road from my house. So I didn't plan that. I'm not saying I'm a wali or anything. I'm just giving you just a story from my own life. You know, I see this, the advice I'm giving you, I see it from my own life. And Allah Ta'ala created the circumstance saying, no, you need to be here. And I'm going to create the circumstance for you to stay here. I hear and I obey. That's the attitude that we have to have. So don't think that you have to move somewhere special, do something special. You can be the greatest thing where you are right now, but it starts by accepting where Allah Ta'ala has placed you. That's what I'm trying to say. Naam.
How should one go about finding patients that are like finding a light at the end of the tunnel and dealing with like health problems that are in this current sense uncurable? I know we don't like to say uncurable because Allah has an answer for everything, but how should one like find the light at the end of the tunnel and deal with a test that seems to be going on forever?
Yani every test that we have behind it is the relief. So every difficulty behind it is ease. So we have to know that when Allah Ta'ala afflicts us with something, then Allah Ta'ala wants us to deal with that thing. So a lot of, the elbow example, I ignored it for a year, thinking it will go away, and it just got worse. It wasn't until I said, okay, I really got to fix I can't eat with my right hand. I still really can't. That's why sometimes I eat with my left. I had to deal with it. When I decided to deal with it and focus on it, that's when I found that expert who was able to, tell me what was wrong and show me the steps to getting better. So when you have a problem, sometimes our reaction is like, I don't want to deal with it. I'm going this way. But the problem is what you have to deal with. That's why Allah put it. So you have to bring the problem here and be like, okay, now I need to deal with it. The world is going to hell in a handbasket, it doesn't matter. I got to deal with this problem because that's what Allah wants me to do right now. That's what's obligatory for me to deal with. I'm going to adopt it, embrace it. I'm going to be patient. Ya Allah, make it easy. Show me the way to do it. And then that's how you find that ease that's on the other side of it. Inshallah. Naam. This is the last question, right? No? Okay. Say that again?
Does a person change and transform, or are they just becoming the person that they always were?
Well, if you think about what you just said, you're saying the same thing.
Yeah, the person, let's say, who develops the habit of lying, were they always a liar, or maybe I'm not making sense?
No, you are. That's different. That's a sin. So people lie because they think that there's no repercussions to lie. And we live in a society that's based on lying. So it's okay. It doesn't cost anything. Lying is so much of a sin that Abu Sufyan, before he became Muslim, was insulted when Heraclius accused him of lying. He went to Jerusalem to intercept the Prophet ﷺ's ambassador. And Heraclius said, I want to hear from you, but don't lie. Abu Sufyan, me? Lie? He's the head of the kuffar at the time, he's fighting the Prophet. Me lie? I will never lie. I'm the Sayyid of my people. That's how offensive lying was. That a disbeliever, he was offended that he would be considered a liar. Now, subhanAllah, anyone lies. But it's a major sin. So the problem is with those type of things is we think that there's no repercussion. We think that it's... But what we do when we lie is, we chop away a piece of our soul. So you do the sin so much that your heart just becomes blackened. Your heart becomes blackened because you don't make tawbah, you don't make istighfar. So that's why to start to solve that problem is we have to make istighfar all the time. At least 100 times in the morning and 100 times in the evening. The Prophet ﷺ did it 100 times a day. So when we do that long enough, we leave that space in our spiritual heart that the light shines through, that we start to feel bad that we're lying. If I feel bad that I'm lying, it's much better that I'm lying and I'm not aware that I'm lying. I've made a step in the right direction. And then I feel bad that I'm lying, one more step it's going to be, inshallah, I don't want to lie anymore. And you catch yourself in the lie, like, no, I don't want to say it like that, etc., etc. So that's a spiritual problem. It's all about making istighfar. But you can't like sin and be like, well, God created me this way. That's not good. I thought you were talking about something else. Does that make sense? Naam.
So if you feel that in your day-to-day life, you suddenly feel that you are away from being near, away from Allah, practically what steps could we take to remedy that?
ذكر الله. لكل شيء سقالة وسقالة القلوب ذكر الله. Every metal has a polish, and the polish of the hearts is the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. الذاكرون الله كثيرا والذاكرات. The men that remember Allah often, and the women. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اذكروا الله ذكرا كثيرا وسبحوه بكرة وأصيلا. No act of worship do we have in the Quran and Sunnah that Allah Ta'ala and the Prophet ﷺ tell us to do a lot except dhikr. Everything is specific. The prayer is 5 times a day, the zakah is with certain conditions, fasting is only the 9th month of the Ramadan, Hajj is the Ashhurul Ma'lumat, set days, but dhikr is unlimited. And the Prophet ﷺ, he was described by his wife Sayyidah Aisha alayhi salam that he was always in a state of remembrance. Even when the Prophet ﷺ was in a state of janaba, he made remembrance. So there was no obstruction for us making dhikr. There's no state in our life, even when you go to the bathroom, there's a dhikr for it. There's nothing that we do in our life, even when a man and a woman are intimate, there's a dhikr involved in that. There's nothing that we do in our life except that it's an opportunity to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the way that we remedy this problem is by remembering. Remembering that which we forget. That which we forget are these realities. How do we constantly remember them and not forget? The constant remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's the answer. The answer is dhikr, especially in the age in that we live in. The solution for us is dhikrullah, inshaAllah. Sister. Wa alaykum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Wa iyyak. Well, the first thing is we have to turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and know that every calamity comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by His permission and His will, and inshaAllah with His permission and His will, that calamity can be alleviated. And number 2, we have to educate ourselves. Most people that talk about this issue, they really don't know the details, they don't know the narrative, they don't know the story, they don't know the history. There's maybe 3, 4, 5 books that you can read. They're very easily accessible, they're easy English. You can read to understand how we got into this, how those people got into this situation, and to know the correct narrative. And then number 3, to talk about it with your family, with your community, with your children, your colleagues, not to combat people, not to debate people, but just to talk about it, to keep this issue alive, fresh in people's minds, to teach people the correct narrative, etc. If we do those 3 things, we'll be in a lot better situation than just forgetting about it, and then when something happens, yelling and screaming about it, and then debating, and then we forget about it, and then we yell and we scream about it, etc. Because this is an old problem that has a history. It's actually not a very complicated problem. I know people are using the word complicated. It's not. Killing innocent people is not complicated. It's just wrong. So I don't care who the innocent person is. Israeli, Palestinian, believer, kafir, it doesn't matter. An innocent soul is an innocent soul. وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. That's what we believe. Now other people want to say it's complicated. I have a problem with that. It's not complicated. It's just wrong. So it's not a complicated problem, but it's a problem that has had quite a bit of time. So we need to know how we got to this to make sense of it, because our antagonists in this situation don't want to talk about the history. They want to talk about a certain snapshot of time to be able to justify what they're doing. But that's not how the world works. You have to know this whole situation to be able to understand what's right and what's wrong. And most importantly, we have to remember that right and wrong for us are absolute. They apply to us and they apply to everyone else. There's no special set of rules for Muslims that don't apply to non-Muslims. We don't say that we are better than other people. Allah Ta'ala created all of us, and to Allah, from Him we come, and to Allah Ta'ala we will return. Who is in paradise and who is not in paradise, that's for Allah Subhanahu Wa Ta'ala to decide. So yeah, we have to remember these principles as we engage, inshaAllah, in our learning process, bi'idhnillah. Naam. Permissible to lie? Yani you can lie in battle. And the Prophet ﷺ talked about a husband and a wife from the point of view of that you can exaggerate, like, honey, how do I look in this? Oh, you look amazing. You're the most beautiful woman in the world.
Even if they're actual lie?
No?
Even if they say lie?
Aywa, because it's about husband and wife. And then when you reconcile between two people, so brother A and brother B are fighting, and I go to brother B and you say, you know, brother A, he feels really bad about what he did. If you talk to him, he'll talk to you. I go to brother A, brother B feels really bad, and I reconcile. Those are the three things that the Prophet ﷺ talked about. So none of us are in battle, so there's no excuse to lie. Half of you are not married, so you have no spouse to worry about. And probably half of you don't know the other half, so there's really no excuse to lie. But these are about bending the truth with the purpose of reconciling. These are the three quote-unquote permissible aspects to lie in.
One of the sisters was asking, what are the name of the books that you mentioned to read up on the situation in Gaza right now?
I would start with David Fromkin's A Peace to End All Peace, the fall of the Ottoman Empire and the rise or the making of the modern Middle East. Because that will give you a broader picture. It's like about 500-600 page book, but it will give you a broader picture of the pre-things that got to where we are. And then the Royal, it's called RISC, the Royal Islamic Institute for Strategic Studies, RIISC, in Jordan, which is affiliated with the work that I do in Jordan. We have a series of publications that you can download for free as a PDF called the Jerusalem Papers. I think one of them is called The Keys to Jerusalem. One of them is called On the Israeli Insistence of Acknowledging a Jewish State. One of them is on Why You Should Visit Jerusalem. There's a fourth one that I can't remember. But those writings are very, very short. They're in English and in Arabic. You can download them as a PDF. But The Keys to Jerusalem is very important because it will tell you the history of the land of Palestine, demonstrating that the Arabs, the Canaanites, were the original inhabitants historically, which is very important because that's one of the problems with the narrative. And number two, it will show you that based on the peace treaty that was signed between Israel and Jordan, that the Israelis have acknowledged the Jordanian Hashemite custodianship of Masjid al-Aqsa, which includes Ha'it al-Buraq. The wall of Buraq is what we call the Wailing Wall. That is part of the Hashemite waqf on Masjid al-Aqsa, including the wall and the street outside the wall. This was part of the peace deal, whenever it was in the 90s, between Jordan and Israel. And it also talks about some of the status of the Christian sites in Jerusalem that are also part of the Hashemite waqf. So these are important historical documents because most people don't know this. Actually, most Israelis or pro-Israel people that I have talked to don't know that either. So this is very, very important. And those you could just download as a PDF, as I said, and they're very easy to read. I would start with those, and then probably Rashid Khalidi's, what is it, 100 Years? What is the book? Anyone know the name? Rashid Khalidi's 100 Years War? Yeah, that book. I mean, it's very, you can get that from Amazon, it's very easy. I would start with those. If you look at those, you're going to find all of these footnotes. It will kind of take you in the direction that you want to go. But David Fromkin's book I highly recommend, because I remember I read it, I was an undergraduate student, and it's just, I'm like, oh my God, I had no idea. I mean, I had no idea that this, what a mess, the World War I, World War, what a mess. And the Ottoman Empire collapsing was just, it was just like this huge fitna. It just affected everything. I had no idea how messy it was. So I think that's very important, because you'll understand like the heartland of the Muslim. It's not just Palestine, Israel, but also Lebanon, Syria, all of those countries, Transjordan, Jordan. These are all like countries that were invented almost because of that conflict and carved up in a certain way that have perpetually made them unstable. I mean, now I know why that part of the world is so crazy. So that book, I highly recommend to start with that book. والحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى اللهم على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم صل أفضل صلاة على أسعد مخلوقاتك سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم عدد معلوماتك ومداد كلماتك كلما ذكرك الذاكرون وغفل عن ذكره الغافلون. وفيكم إن شاء الله.